In this tutorial, I'm going to be going over how to make a site plan in Rhino and then how to export that into Illustrator. So I'm going to start by turning off my topo surface, because right now the topo surface is sometimes obscuring some of the contour lines when you look at it from the top. So if this is the case, then whenever you export this out, you're going to see all these breaks in your contour lines. So we're going to turn that off, then switch to our top view. So I'm going to select all of the geometry and type Make 2D. Now I want to make sure that in the options Maintain Source Layers is checked. Then I'm going to click OK. So I made a copy of that in 2D, and I'm just going to drag it out to the side so that it's separate from my original line work. So you can see it is basically a copy of what we have right here, but if I go in a perspective view, it's all on one plane. So you can see in the Layers panel that we have Make 2D, and it basically just made a copy of each one of the layers that we had before. So what I'm going to do is set up a new set of layers so we can move the lines into the corresponding layers once they get into Illustrator. So I'm going to set up a heavy. So I'm going to set up a heavy, medium, and light layer for the building. Then in addition to these, I'm going to make a layer for contours, our property line, some trees. Then I'm going to add in some paths and some water. Now your plane might not have all these, and you can also add more if you need to. Now my plane doesn't have a property line, so I'm just going to draw one in just for the purpose of this video, but you should have one on your own site. So now the objective is just to move all these lines into the correct layers of what type of line they want to be. So for my contours, I can actually go into Make 2D, into the contours, select them, and that'll select all of the 2D contours. And then I can come down here and actually change those into the contour layer. And I'm actually going to turn them off so I can see kind of what I've completed already. Now for this, I want to open back up my perspective and top view. So I'm going to use the perspective to see what object is the highest or the lowest to figure out what type of line weight they should be. So something that's closer to the camera, which is at the top looking down, is going to be a heavier line weight. So that would be this tower right here, and then this roof section right here. So I'm going to select that, move that into the heavy, and then select this roof and move it into the heavy. And you want to make sure that all of your layers have different colors to them, because when we bring them into Illustrator, we're going to use the colors in order to separate out the lines. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is move the light lines into that layer. So in this, it would be whatever object is at the bottom of the model. So that would be these two lines right here. Then also any line that's delineating a change in material or on a surface. So actually this line right here, which is showing right here, there actually most likely would not be a line there because they're still the same material. I just modeled them as two separate planes. So I'm going to leave that the way it is. So I'm going to select those two, move those into the light layer. And also I'm just going to clean up a few of the lines there. And you can see in our perspective view that this line right here, and then also these lines right here, are just referencing a change in material, so we can change those also to light. Sometimes you might have to edit a few of the lines. For example, this one right here. We want this to be light, but we want this to be medium. So I'm going to turn my control points on, and then I'm going to move this over to here. Redraw a line in the light layer, so I can fill that back. Then I'm going to change this line back to medium. So I've got all our light lines, I'm going to turn those off, and whatever's left, I'm going to change that to medium. So turning everything back on. To maximize the viewport, and a little trick to trim our contour lines with the trim command. We're going to select our property boundary, and I'm just going to highlight around the edges here, and this is going to trim all of our lines. And I can just go ahead and delete these. So the next thing I want to do is put in some trees. Switch to my tree layer. Now for the trees, we're going to draw some circles, and this is going to represent the extents of the canopy overhead. So I'm just going to do some variations here. If you have any specific sizes that you want them, you could type in the diameter or radius while you're doing this. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put in a little pond here in our water layer. And normally if you had a pond, you would be able to see the outline of that in the contours because of the way the topography is shaped. But I'm just going to ignore that in this tutorial just to save a little bit of time, because that's something that's not already built into our topography. I'm going to use trim, just going to trim out these interior contours. Then I'm going to draw a path that leads up to our building. Switching to the path layer. Probably one of the best tools for this is the control point curve. So I'm just going to start on our building, and we'll just have this path kind of coming out under between these trees. So I've got one curve there. The way that I could make the other half of that path is I could just do a simple copy and copy it up. But another way you could do that is with the offset tool. So say we have another path that is maybe coming around this side of the building. So we can select our path, type in offset, we're going to type D for distance and set that to 5 feet. And we're going to offset it to the left side. You just have to watch out for where these are coming together here. Just got to use the trim command, trim that piece. And then it's hanging over our site boundary a little bit, so I'm just going to trim that out. And then here I'm actually going to use these two pieces as the trimming objects, and I'm going to trim that central line out. Alright, so we've got our site plan done, and now it's time to make a layout of this. So I'm going to go up into my drafting toolbar, click New Layout. I set this to 11 by 17 landscape. I'll give it a name. Then I'm going to double click inside to position my view. Then under the properties is where you have your scale option, so I'm going to click that. Distance and layout is going to be 1. Distance in the model we'll set, I'll try 8 feet. So that doesn't exactly fit everything, so we'll run that again. I'll try 1 and 16. So that fits everything in the window. Then it's time to print to a PDF, so I'm going to go File, Print. So in the options, the key is you want to have the color set to either print or display color. And you want to make sure that your output type is set to vector, because this is going to print vector lines instead of giving you a raster image. Now you also have to make sure that you're in a wireframe view. If you're in shaded view inside of this view, Rhino is not going to be able to print to a vector. So you have to make sure you're in wireframe view. So we're going to go File, Print. Alright, so our PDF has been saved. I'm going to go ahead and open that up in Illustrator. Now in Illustrator, you want to set up the same layers that you had in the Rhino file. So I'm going to make a new folder. I'm going to call this line work. And I'm going to create a bunch of sub-layers. So we're going to have our heavy, medium, and light lines. Then we're going to have our contours, path, trees, water, and property boundary. Now before we start moving anything, you want to select all of your lines and go up to Object, Clipping Mask, and if you have any clipping masks, click Release here. And then keep doing this until you don't see this anymore. I don't see any on mine, but I've seen a few on some other people's that I've seen, so if you don't do that, it'll keep the objects grouped together and it'll be much harder to move the lines. So now, just to see everything a little bit clearer, I'm going to select all of the lines, go into the stroke panel. I'm just going to change it to 1 because right now it was set to like 0.06, so it's very hard to see. So I changed everything to 1. So I'm going to select the line, go up to Select, Same Stroke Color. You can also get to this up in this little button here. You click that, set it to Stroke Color. Then once you select a line, you can actually just click this button here, Select Similar Objects. It's a little shortcut. So we're going to move those up into Contours, turn it off so I know that I'm done. Do the same thing for the trees. Then our path. Alright, so we've got them all moved in. I'm going to delete our layer 1, turn everything back on. Then I'm going to set everything to black. So up in the color panel, select the stroke, then click on black. So before we start adjusting this, I actually want to make a copy of my line work layer. So I'm going to duplicate that layer. And this is going to be used for our live paint. So I'm actually going to set that up now, so make sure our initial line work is turned off. So then with our line work selected, before we go in, I'm just going to change the stroke to 0. Before I set the color of the stroke to none, we're usually setting the stroke to 0. That's also a different way of doing that so that your the lines from the live paint group don't show after you adjust the lines of your line work that's sitting on top of the live paint. So I've got all those selected. I'm going to go to Object, Live Paint, Make. You can see it grouped everything here. I'm just going to rename this Live Paint. And I'm just going to drag the group up into there, and I don't need any of these layers, so I'm going to go ahead and delete them. And then I'm going to move my live paint below the line work because I want the line work to sit on top. So I'm just going to turn off the live paint for now, and then we'll focus back on the line work. So now I'm basically going to start at the top and work my way down. So with the heavy, I'm going to keep everything black for now, but I'm going to set the weight of that to 3. Medium, we'll go with like maybe 1.5, and then light, we'll go with 0.75. Contours we'll make at 0.5, Path, we'll make it 0.35. Trees, we're going to make at, say, 3. Property boundary we'll make at 4. And then water we'll just stick it at 0.5. Alright, so I've got all the strokes set up the way I want, but not necessarily the colors. So with our trees, I'm going to select all the trees. And I'm actually going to change the stroke color to maybe like a mid-gray, maybe a little bit lighter than that. For these, I actually want to make them dash, because that's how trees are usually represented on a site plan. So under the stroke panel, that should expand the stroke panel. So click on dashed line, and then the number here is basically the distance in points of the length of that dash, and then also the space between it. So I'm just going to set that at 10. You can also change with these options whether the lines have square ends or if they are round. Actually, I'm just going to bring the line weight down to 2. Next thing is our contours. So I'm going to select all those. I'm going to change the stroke color to maybe an even lighter gray. Yeah, it's not light enough. Be something like that. And I'm also going to give these a dashed line. So right now, let's see how 10 looks. Okay, that looks good. I just want to make them a little bit lighter, so they're not too distracting. Alright, that looks pretty good. Now you want to move on to our property boundary. I'm going to keep this black. So with property lines, they're either usually like a long dash and then 1 short dash, or a long dash and then 2 short dashes. So one way you can do that, say we'll set our first dash to something like maybe 15, then the gap we'll put in a 10-point gap, then a 10-point dash, and then another 10-point gap. Actually, delete that last one there. I'm actually going to change the dash to 25. So actually that put in a long dash, and then a short dash, and then a longer one. So now I can even adjust that more, say make this 30, and put in another 10, and then another 10. So this will give us a longer dash and then 2 short dashes. So you can use these numbers to control like how long each of these dashes and the gaps is in a line. Alright, so that's the basics of editing the line work, but we also have the live paint underneath, which you can use to enhance this site plan. So I'm going to close up my line work. I'm going to leave it on, but I'm going to lock it. Then I'm going to turn the live paint layer on. So switching to my live paint bucket tool, which is K. You can also get to it around this area in the palette. Then what I find handy to open to be able to pre-select colors instead of manually choosing them in the color, is if you go to swatches and go up to this little drop down menu here, click on Open Swatch Library, Default and Basic RGB. This will just give you a basic selection of colors that you can choose from. So we're going to give our grass a nice green, but I don't want to make this too strong or too saturated. I want to kind of fade the colors a little bit so that the highlight is on our building. I'm just going to give it kind of a less saturated green. And for most of this, I want to make sure my stroke is set to none, just that we just want to have a fill for this. So you can see as I'm moving this around that I probably should have not included the contours in our live paint group, because you want our land to act as like one big group. But over here I can just kind of click and drag and paint all of these in. I'm actually going to desaturate it a little bit more. Alright, so I'm liking that. Actually, I'm going to use this slightly darker green for our trees. And we're going to use the lighter just for the grass. Alright, so we've got all our grass and our trees. I'm going to put in just kind of a light brownish gray for the path. Because it's up to you if you want to decide whether your tree canopies are going to go over your path or you're going to have your path go over the canopies. In this one I'm going to have the path actually go underneath, so the canopies and that darker green is going to stay on top. And then for our building, I'm just going to do some different shades of brown. So I'm going to have a darker one for the top, and a little bit lighter for our medium, and then kind of a more bright at the bottom. So right now all of these lines have rounded corners on them, which isn't really helping the aesthetic that we're going for. So I'm going to jump back to my layers panel under the line work. Select, say, the heavy lines. Now under the stroke where it says cap, you want to select the last option. This is going to change the corner of those from rounded to square. And I'm going to repeat that for the other medium and the light. And then here it actually looks like I have a line in the wrong layer, so I'm just going to switch that over to light. And I'm going to make the canopies of the trees a little bit darker because now they're getting lost behind the green. So I'm going to switch back to the color and the stroke, make it a little bit darker gray. Alright, so that's standing out a bit more. Then I'm going to do the same for the contours because they're still getting a little bit lost. So also on your site plan you usually want to have a north arrow. So one way of doing that is we could simply just draw a line. I'm going to change it to black. Turn off dash lines, and then under the stroke you can select an arrowhead. You can select one of these arrows, maybe bump up the stroke a bit. And if you make this line short enough, the line should actually disappear inside the arrow. So then we can stick this somewhere in our plan. Say, for example, north is this way. We can use that to indicate. Another thing is drawing a scale bar. So a scale bar will usually look something like this. Just have more of a visual layout. So in case later down the road your drawing's proportions or your size get changed, you can always use this scale bar as like a visual reference to see how big something is. So one way you can draw that scale bar, since our drawing is in 16th scales, basically 1 inch will be 16 feet. So I'm going to get the rectangle here, change our fill color to black, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle, then I'm going to go up to the sizing here under the width and the height. For the width I'm actually going to set it to, for the width I'm going to set it to 0.5 and a height of 0.25 inches. So this is going to represent half an inch or 8 feet. The next one I'm going to copy down to this corner. And I'm going to change the width to 1. So this is going to be 16 feet or 1 inch. You see the next one, then I'm going to double it again in size. Change it to 2. And actually I'm going to have one more down here. This is going to be 0.25. Then I can just get my text here. And I can label that 0, or even 0 feet. So this would be 4 feet. Actually, I did this a little bit off, so actually what you want to do is have so 0, 4, actually this will be 8. Then this will be 16. This will be 32. And finally we'll have 64. And if you wanted to go also for another look, you could just go in and fill in these lines right here. You can see our lines are overhanging the bars a little bit, so what we can do is I'm going to change all these lines to have a stroke of 0.5. And then I'm going to select all these rectangles and actually add in a stroke of 0.5. So that should hopefully match up with these lines so that you can see there's no gap there. And the last thing I'm going to do is just adjust these, make them true black. Right now they're a very dark gray. Alright, that didn't seem to work. Try that again. Okay, I guess because we were adjusting the stroke that time. So we'll go back to the fill. Double click, just drag to the corner. Alright, so now that's pure black. We missed one. So one thing you can do is use the eyedropper tool to sample one of the other blocks that you drew. So that should pick out those new colors. So we've got our scale bar, our site plan, live paint group, and our north arrow.